"Help me." 2 words, barely a whisper, but enough to freeze a seasoned cop in his tracks. Officer Ethan Foster had pulled over hundreds of cars in his 20 years on the force. Broken taillights, speeding, reckless teenagers. He had seen it all. But nothing prepared him for the look in that little girl's eyes. She was no older than 6, a black child with small braids dangling against her cheeks, clutching a doll so tight her fingers turned pale. Sitting in the back of a faded black sedan, she looked out at Ethan with eyes that weren't tired, but hollow. Eyes that begged without sound. Her lips trembled, forming the words again. "Help me." The driver, Eric Johnson, smiled too easily. His shirt was neatly pressed, his license spotless, his voice calm enough to lull suspicion. On paper, he was perfect. But the way his hand lingered on the girl's shoulder, it wasn't the touch of a father. It was possession. Control. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. Every instinct he had, honed over decades, screamed at him to act. Yet there was no crime he could prove. A rolling stop at a sign wasn't enough to hold a man, not when the paperwork, the car, and the story all lined up. Against his gut, Ethan let them go. The sedan drifted into the night, its taillights shrinking into the distance. But Ethan remained standing in the dark street, unable to shake the image. The girl's rigid posture, her forced smile, her lips whispering the plea that no one else could hear. Later, when he replayed the dashcam footage, he saw it again. Slowed frame by frame, her mouth shaping those 2 fragile words. "Help me." The whisper cut deeper than any scream could. What secret was buried behind that fragile smile? Who exactly was Eric Johnson, and what darkness clung to him? Why did this single traffic stop feel like the start of something far bigger and far deadlier than Ethan could have imagined? He didn't know it yet, but that decision, to let the car drive away, would haunt him more than any bullet ever could. Because sometimes justice isn't about evidence. Sometimes it's about instinct. And sometimes hesitation is the one mistake you never get to take back. This is the story of one cop, one child, and one night when time was already running out. He let Sophie disappear into the night. If you were Ethan, would you have trusted your instincts or the system? The night was supposed to be quiet. Patrol shifts in Meadowville usually dragged on with little more than drunk drivers and paperwork waiting back at the station. Officer Ethan Foster had long since learned how to live with monotony. But monotony, he always told himself, was safer than chaos. Ethan Foster was not the kind of cop people forgot. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a weary sharpness in his eyes, he carried the look of a man who had seen too much but refused to look away. He was known in the department for his precision, his stubborn sense of duty, and most of all, for the way he treated children. To Ethan, protecting them wasn't just a job. It was personal. Years ago, there had been another night, another stop, another little black girl. Ethan hadn't been the one in charge then. A younger officer, eager to impress, had waved it off. The girl had vanished the next day. Ethan still remembered the mother's scream in the precinct lobby, the raw, tearing sound of grief that lived in his bones. He had promised himself, never again. Not on his watch. That memory haunted him as he drove through the silent streets now. The hum of the cruiser's engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio were the only sounds breaking the silence. 10 o'clock. The kind of night that lulls officers into letting their guard down. But Ethan never let go of the past long enough to relax. When his headlights caught the movement of a black sedan slipping past a stop sign, the routine instinct kicked in. "Flip the lights, signal the stop." He announced it calmly into the radio, his tone as steady as stone. To anyone listening, it was just another traffic stop. To Ethan, something about it already felt heavier. As he approached the car, his boots tapping the pavement, every sense in his body sharpened. He carried the still image of that other girl, missing, never found, like a ghost whispering in his ear. So when the window rolled down and Eric Johnson smiled too easily, Ethan's suspicion flickered awake. Johnson was polite. Too polite. His voice rehearsed, his story about dinner with his sister neat and tidy. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. Papers matched, registration valid. No record, but Ethan's gaze slid past him into the back seat. And there she was, the black girl whose whisper had already cut through him like a blade, her tiny body stiff, her hands clutching the doll as if it were the last safe place in the world. She smiled when Eric looked at her, but it wasn't real. It was mechanical, a mask stretched across fear. Ethan noticed the way her shoulders tightened under his touch, the way her eyes darted anywhere but forward. For anyone else, it could have looked like fatigue. To Ethan, it looked like terror. He asked her name. "Sophie," Eric answered quickly, almost too quickly, cutting off the girl's own whisper. The child nodded, but the nod was stiff, unnatural. Ethan's gut told him everything was wrong. But protocol told him there was nothing he could do. How many times had he been here before? The tension between instinct and procedure, between knowing and proving. He let them go, and as the sedan pulled away, the weight of it settled into him. He returned to his cruiser, sat in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, and wrote down the plate number, 4A2F291. His pen dug into the paper harder than necessary. He told himself it was just another stop, but his heart refused to listen. Sitting there, Ethan thought of the mother from years ago. Her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking as she asked why no one had listened. He had no answer for her then. Would he have one now? The streets outside were still calm, still deceptively peaceful. But Ethan's mind was a storm, circling one truth. He had just looked into the eyes of a child asking to be saved, and he had let her disappear into the night. Was this the same mistake all over again? Or was this the moment he could finally keep his promise? Ethan couldn't let it go. He sat in the dim light of his office at the station, the night ticking past midnight. Reports were piled high on his desk, but his pen hadn't touched a page. His mind was stuck on one image, the little girl's lips forming words too soft for the world to hear. "Help me." He opened the dash cam recording, the grainy footage painting the same scene he had lived hours earlier. Eric Johnson, smiling too wide, speaking too smoothly, and behind him, the girl, rigid, pale, clutching her doll. Ethan slowed the video. Frame by frame, her lips moved. His stomach dropped when he saw the phrase again. Clearer this time. 2 words that shattered the calm of procedure. "Help me." He rewound it, convinced he might be imagining things. But no, it was there. The plea was real. Ethan leaned back, his chest heavy. He scribbled the plate number again in his notebook as if writing it twice would change the past. 4A2F291, Eric Johnson, Meadowbrook Lane. No priors. Clean on paper. Too clean. He dug deeper, expanded the search. At first, nothing. Just a man with an ordinary address, an ordinary life. But as he widened the net into other counties, other states, Fragments began to appear. Mentions in old interviews. Anonymous tips that went nowhere. Reports of a man seen near parks, playgrounds, gas stations, always with a child. Children who later went missing. No charges ever stuck, but the pattern was undeniable. Ethan's mouth went dry. He tapped into the national database, pulling up Amber Alerts. His breath caught as he scrolled past the active notices. Then he froze. Missing child, Sophie Miller, age 6. Black female, blonde-tipped braids. Last seen, Ridgefield playground 4 days ago. The description hit him like a blow. The photo, bright eyes, smiling wide in happier times, was the same child he had seen in the back of Eric Johnson's sedan. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. His throat closed as the truth locked into place. Sophie wasn't Johnson's daughter. She wasn't on her way home from dinner. She was a kidnapped child. And Ethan had let her drive away. He stood so fast his chair toppled behind him. His hand gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening. His instincts had been right, and he had ignored them. "Mistake," he muttered, voice raw. "Goddamn mistake." He grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Foster. I need an APB out immediately. Black sedan, plate 4A2F291, registered to Eric Johnson. Possible abduction, child matches active Amber Alert. Contact Ridgefield PD and coordinate now." The dispatcher's voice crackled back, calm but alert. "Copy that, Foster. Alert is going out. Stand by." But standing by wasn't an option. Ethan paced the office, pulling maps from the drawer, tracing routes Johnson could have taken. Meadowbrook Lane was the registered address, but Ethan knew predators didn't bring victims home. He would have another place. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere practiced. He remembered Johnson's calm, too calm demeanor. Predators often overcompensated. And the way Sophie recoiled from his touch. Fear that deep didn't come overnight. This wasn't Johnson's first time. Ethan slammed his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing through the near-empty station. His mind flashed back to that mother years ago, begging for answers, her daughter gone forever. He had sworn it would never happen again. But it was happening. Right now, he snatched up his phone, dialing Detective Laura Benson. Her voice answered on the second ring, sharp and awake despite the hour. "Laura, it's Foster," he said. Words clipped, urgency bleeding through. "We've got a situation. I pulled over a sedan tonight. Eric Johnson driving. 6-year-old black girl in the back seat. At the time I let them go. I just ran the plate. She matches an Amber Alert out of Ridgefield. Sophie Miller, missing 4 days. It's her." A pause. Silence heavy on the line. Then Laura's voice, hard as steel. "You let them go?" "I didn't have cause," Ethan snapped back, the self-loathing thick in his throat. "Everything looked clean. But he's the one, Laura. He's been doing this for years. I saw it in her eyes. We can't waste another second." On the other end, Laura exhaled slowly. "All right. We do this right. Johnson's smart. If he's been at it this long, he's careful. But he's not untouchable. Send me the dash cam. Meet me at the station in 20. We'll coordinate with Ridgefield." Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, closing his eyes as Sophie's image burned into his mind. A child stolen from her family, trapped in the back seat of a predator's car, begging with only her lips because her voice had been taken from her. The night outside remained deceptively quiet. But for Sophie Miller, every second lost was a second closer to disappearing forever. The past and present collided, and Sophie was now in Johnson's hands. If justice failed once before, would you risk believing in it again? The station was nearly silent, the kind of silence that made every sound louder than it should be. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint clatter of a distant typewriter, Mundane noises turned into reminders of time slipping away. Ethan Foster sat hunched over his desk. The dashcam footage paused on the still frame of Sophie Miller's face. The girl's eyes stared back at him, hollow and desperate, frozen forever in that single plea. "Help me." He pressed his palms into his eyes, trying to erase the image. But the harder he tried, the clearer it became. He had let her go. He had looked directly at a child begging for salvation and waved her back into the arms of her captor. The guilt was suffocating. It coiled around his chest, a snake squeezing tighter with each breath. He thought about the report he should be writing. Dry words on paper that would never capture the weight of his failure. How could ink explain that he had recognized the fear but chosen procedure instead? That he had let protocol silence his instincts? His mind dragged him backward, years ago, to another night. Another girl. She had been 8, maybe 9. Black. Thin braids, shy smile. He remembered standing in the background while his partner, Officer Grayson, brushed off a mother's concerns. The woman had begged them, "Please, my daughter didn't come home. Please do something." Grayson had smirked, muttered about runaways, and turned his back. The girl was never found. The mother's scream in the lobby of the precinct still echoed in Ethan's memory. A sound that wasn't just grief. It was betrayal. She had trusted the badge, trusted the system, and the system had shrugged. That scream lived inside Ethan like a splinter, a wound that never healed. And now, with Sophie, he felt the old scar tear open again. He rose from his chair, pacing the small office, hands gripping his hair. The fluorescent lights above seemed too harsh, exposing every flaw, every failure. His reflection in the window looked like a man unraveling. Eyes red, jaw clenched, shoulders weighed down by ghosts. "God damn it!" he muttered to the empty room. His voice cracked, foreign in the stillness. He thought of Sophie's parents. Were they sitting somewhere now? Clutching a photograph? Praying their little girl would come home? Did they know that the only man who had seen her tonight had let her vanish? What would he say to them if she was never found? I had a feeling. But it wasn't enough. Ethan gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. He couldn't undo the mistake, but he could refuse to let it be the end. He opened Sophie's case file, scrolling through the details. Ridgefield playground, last seen 4 days ago, wearing a yellow dress with white shoes. Witnesses described a dark sedan near the park. The pieces fit too neatly. Johnson wasn't just a chance encounter. He was the predator they'd been searching for. The walls seemed to close in as Ethan studied the file. He felt the weight of the entire system pressing down. The rules, the protocols, the blind spots that allowed men like Johnson to slip through again and again. It was as if the very machinery of justice was built to hesitate, to stall, until it was too late. A storm raged inside him. Anger at Johnson, yes, but also at himself, at Grayson, at every cop who had chosen convenience over courage. He was sick of the silence, sick of the excuses. He slammed the file shut, the sound startling in the quiet. There was no turning back time, no erasing the sight of Sophie's lips shaping the words. But there was still a chance to act, to fight, to prove that this time he wouldn't let the system's hesitation cost a child her life. He looked again at the paused image on the screen. Sophie's eyes met his across the glow of the monitor, and for a moment it felt like she was asking him directly, "Are you going to let me disappear too?" Ethan's throat tightened. His answer wasn't in words. It was in the fire building in his chest, in the vow that no matter what it cost, He would not fail her again. The clock on the wall ticked past 1 a.m. The night outside was still, deceptively calm. But inside Ethan Foster, the storm had settled into resolve. And somewhere out there, Sophie Miller was still alive, waiting, praying for someone to keep their promise this time. The night didn't give Ethan rest. Even as he drove toward the Ridgefield precinct to meet Laura, memories clawed their way to the surface. Memories he had buried deep, but never forgotten. Years ago, long before Sophie Miller, there had been another child. Her name was Kiara Thomas, 9 years old, black. She had vanished after school one rainy evening. Ethan had been a young officer then, not yet hardened by time, still believing the system always worked. They'd had a suspect, white, mid-40s, with a history of lurking near playgrounds. Witnesses placed him near the scene, and Kiara's backpack was found in the trunk of his car. To Ethan, it was enough to bring the man down. But in the courtroom, everything unraveled. He still remembered standing at the back of the crowded chamber as the defense painted Kiara's mother as hysterical and unreliable. Evidence was deemed circumstantial. The judge, an older white man with decades on the bench, leaned back in his chair, his tone dripping with doubt as he dismissed key testimony. And then came the verdict, not guilty. Ethan remembered the sound Kiara's mother made, a sound that silenced the whole room. A wail of grief and rage echoing against the wood-paneled walls, shaming every badge and robe in the building. The suspect walked free, smirking as if the whole process had been theater. Kiara was never found. That memory was a wound Ethan carried like a second badge, heavier, sharper, cutting deeper each year. And now, looking into Sophie's terrified eyes, the wound ripped open. This time, the story could not end in the same courtroom silence. Not again. The radio crackled, snapping him back to the present. Laura's voice. "Foster, I've already looped in Ridgefield. They're expecting us, and there's something else. You need to know." "What?" Ethan asked, his jaw tight. "The girl's parents, Peter and Stella Miller. They're here. They've been camped at the precinct since the second day she went missing. Peter's a wealthy businessman. His family has influence. Reporters are already circling. If this goes public, we won't just be hunting Johnson. We'll be under a spotlight." Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. Wealth, power, cameras, none of it mattered to him. All he saw was Sophie. But he knew Laura was right. Pressure like this could either bring speed or mistakes. When he arrived at the Ridgefield precinct, the lobby was packed. Reporters' cameras flashed, hungry for updates, their lenses like vultures. Ethan kept his head down as Laura ushered him past, but he couldn't help noticing the couple seated against the wall. Stella Miller's face was pale, her eyes swollen from days of crying. Peter Miller sat beside her, his posture stiff, his jaw locked, a man doing everything not to fall apart in public. They looked up as Ethan passed. Stella's voice broke through the crowd. "Officer, please, tell me you've seen her." Ethan froze. The words hit him like a bullet. He glanced at Laura, but she gave no signal. This was his moment. "Yes," he said, his voice low but steady. "I saw her tonight." Stella's hands shot to her mouth. Peter leaned forward, eyes burning. Where is she?" Ethan swallowed hard, guilt tightening his throat. "She was with a man, Eric Johnson. I pulled them over. At the time, I didn't know. But it's her, I'm sure of it." The room seemed to tilt as Stella collapsed into Peter's arms, sobbing openly. Reporters whispered, pens scribbling furiously. Peter's gaze stayed locked on Ethan, sharp as glass. "You had her," Peter said, voice low, almost shaking. "You had my daughter and you let her drive away." The words cut deeper than any reprimand. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came. What excuse could he give? That the system tied his hands? That he had chosen procedure over instinct? None of it mattered to parents who had just learned their daughter had been so close to rescue. Laura stepped in, her voice controlled. "We're moving now. We have the name, the plate, and the trail. We won't let him vanish again." Peter's face was carved with fury and grief. "Bring her back, whatever it takes." As Ethan turned away, Sophie's picture on the precinct wall caught his eye again. He saw Kiara's face behind it. The child the system had failed. He clenched his fists. This was no longer just a case. It was redemption. For Kiara. For Sophie. For every parent who had screamed into a void and gotten silence back. The past and the present had collided, and this time Ethan swore the ending would be different. Ethan had spent too many years watching predators slip through cracks. Not tonight. Not with Sophie Miller's face burned into his mind like a brand. In the briefing room at Ridgefield Precinct, the atmosphere was sharp with urgency. Maps were spread across the table, photographs pinned to corkboards, and a line of tired but determined officers filled the room. Laura Benson stood at the front, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Eric Johnson, 45, no prior convictions, clean record on paper, but we've cross-referenced sightings from 3 states. Every time a child has gone missing, Johnson's name hovers somewhere in the background." She tapped the board, where a series of dots and dates were marked across counties. He doesn't take risks, he plans, he waits, and then he vanishes. Ethan's jaw was tight as he leaned against the table. "Not this time." Laura's eyes flicked to him. She didn't need to remind him of the weight he was carrying. Everyone in the room already knew. Ethan had been the one to see Sophie last. If they failed, the guilt would eat him alive. A younger officer spoke up, pointing to the map. "We checked Johnson's registered address, Meadowbrook Lane. Nothing. House is clean, hasn't been touched. He's not bringing a victim home." Ethan shook his head. "Predators like him don't bring their secrets where people can find them. He has somewhere else. Isolated. Somewhere he controls." Laura pulled another file. "We've flagged a hunting cabin 30 miles out. Belonged to Johnson's uncle, supposedly abandoned. Locals say it's been empty for years." Ethan's voice was firm. "That's where he'll go." But Laura hesitated. "Or he wants us to think that. Johnson has been careful for decades. He's stayed out of cuffs this long because he anticipates us. If we move too fast, we tip him off." Ethan slammed his fist lightly on the table, enough to draw eyes. "Every minute we debate is another minute Sophie loses. She doesn't have time for bureaucracy. We go now." The room went still. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Laura studied him, her sharp mind weighing instinct against caution. Then she gave a single nod. "All right, we send a team to the cabin. Discreet. We don't storm unless we confirm. Ethan, you and I lead it." The decision sparked movement. Radios buzzed. Gear was checked. Within minutes they were on the road, engines growling against the midnight quiet. Ethan drove with Laura in the passenger seat, the headlights cutting through stretches of forest and open road. For a time, the silence between them was louder than words. Finally, Laura spoke. "You know this isn't just about Sophie, right?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "It's about all of them." Laura nodded. "I've seen the files. The missing kids, the whispers that never stuck. Johnson's just one piece. He's part of something bigger. And if we don't think beyond tonight, we'll save Sophie, but we'll lose others." Her words dug deep. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. He had always known predators didn't work alone. The fake IDs, the forged paperwork, the way Johnson had looked so practiced. This wasn't the work of one man. The thought chilled him, but also fueled him. Tonight was more than redemption. It was the first strike in a larger war. Laura glanced at him. "You ready for that?" Ethan's reply was quiet, but hard as stone. "I don't get to walk away anymore." The car fell silent again, the only sound the engine's steady roar. In Ethan's chest, determination settled like armor. As the forest road narrowed, the cabin came into view, a sagging silhouette against the tree line. The place looked abandoned. Windows boarded, roof sagging, weeds swallowing the porch. No lights, no sign of life. They parked a distance away, approaching on foot. Flashlights cut thin beams through the trees. Every creak of a branch sounded like a warning. Ethan's heart pounded, his senses stretched thin. Was Sophie inside? Was she even alive? Or was this just another layer of Johnson's deception? He crouched near the porch, motioning to Laura. She tested the door. It swung open on rusted hinges. The cabin was empty, dust heavy in the air, cobwebs draped across rotting furniture. No Sophie. No Johnson. Ethan cursed under his breath, frustration clawing at him. But Laura bent down, examining the floor. Fresh footprints, 2 sets, 1 adult, 1 child. Ethan's pulse spiked. Sophie had been here. The realization burned in his chest. They were close, but close wasn't enough. Not yet. The hunting cabin had been a dead end, but not without clues. Fresh footprints, too small to be an adult's, had been stamped into the dirt. Sophie had been there, and if Johnson had moved her, he wouldn't be far. It was nearly 3 in the morning when a tip came through the dispatch. A waitress at a roadside diner had spotted a nervous man with a young black girl clutching a doll. He'd asked about motels nearby. Laura's eyes met Ethan's. No words were needed. They both knew. Johnson was trying to disappear again. They rolled into the Riverside Lodge minutes later. The place was a graveyard of peeling paint and buzzing neon, a rundown stretch of single-story rooms crawling with shadows. Ethan's headlights swept across the cracked asphalt and landed on the familiar black sedan. His pulse surged. Laura spoke into her radio, voice clipped. "Suspect vehicle located. Room number?" The night clerk, pale with nerves, pointed down the row. 13. Checked in an hour ago. He wasn't alone. The girl was with him. Ethan's jaw tightened. Room 13. Unlucky number. Tonight, he prayed it would be unlucky for Johnson. They approached on foot, hugging the shadows, weapons holstered but ready. Through a slit in the curtain, Ethan glimpsed movement. Johnson pacing, jittery, muttering under his breath. On the edge of the bed sat Sophie, small and stiff, her doll gripped so tightly it looked like her fingers might break. Ethan's chest clenched. She was alive. Terrified, but alive. They waited. Then fate handed them a chance. Johnson grabbed a cigarette, stepped out onto the porch. The glow of the ember lit his face, gaunt with tension. He didn't see Ethan until it was too late. "Eric Johnson!" Ethan's voice thundered as he lunged forward. "You're under arrest for the kidnapping of Sophie Miller." Johnson spun, shock flashing across his features, but Ethan was faster. He slammed him against the wall, wrenching his arms back. Laura snapped the cuffs over his wrists with a decisive click. Johnson's voice was a mixture of rage and desperation. "She's my daughter! You've got it all wrong!" "No," Laura hissed, her face inches from his. "She's not your daughter. She's a child you stole." But before relief could take hold, the sound of shuffling feet inside the room cut through the night. Ethan turned just in time to see Sophie bolt through the open door, her small frame dashing across the parking lot toward the tree line. If you were Sophie, would you keep running into the darkness, or risk turning back toward the officers? "Sophie!" Ethan shouted, breaking into a run. The girl vanished into the woods, swallowed by shadows. Branches cracked. Then came another sound, a heavier set of footsteps, too heavy to be hers. Ethan's flashlight caught a glimpse of a figure in a hood, slipping between the trees, fast and deliberate. Johnson hadn't been working alone. Ethan's heart hammered as he plunged into the forest after them. Behind him, Laura kept Johnson pinned, shouting for backup. What would you do if you were Ethan? Charge into the unknown, or wait for backup? The motel parking lot fell away, replaced by darkness thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Sophie's cries echoed faintly ahead, each one pulling Ethan deeper into the maze. He didn't know what waited for him in that forest. Another predator, another trap. But he knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning of the fight. The forest swallowed sound, muffling every cry, every crack of a branch. Ethan sprinted through the undergrowth, his flashlight darting across trunks and shadows. Ahead, Sophie's sobs echoed. Faint, fragile, but enough to guide him. Then he saw her. She was huddled near a fallen log, arms wrapped around her doll, eyes wide with terror. Towering over her was a man in a hood, his frame broad, movements deliberate. He wasn't panicked. He was waiting. "Step away from her!" Ethan's voice ripped through the night, his gun trained steady. The hooded man turned slowly, face half hidden by shadow. His voice was calm, too calm. "You're late, officer. Always late. That's why we win." Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random accomplice. This was someone who knew. Someone who had been watching. The man lunged. The forest exploded with motion, branches snapping, dirt spraying. Ethan fired, but the shot went wide as the man slammed into him, knocking the gun loose. They crashed to the ground, fists and elbows colliding in a brutal struggle. Ethan grunted as a blow caught his ribs. Pain flared, but rage carried him. He clawed, swung, grappled, each strike fueled by the faces of Kiara, Sophie. Every child lost. The hood slipped for a moment, revealing sharp eyes, a scar cutting across his cheek. The man sneered. "You think Johnson was the end? He's nothing, just bait. We're bigger than you'll ever stop." Ethan roared, slamming his head into the man's jaw. The attacker staggered, giving Ethan just enough space to scramble for his gun. But before he could fire, the figure melted back into the trees, vanishing as quickly as he appeared. Sophie's cries pierced the darkness. Ethan turned, rushing to her side. He dropped to his knees, lowering his weapon. "Sophie, it's me. You're safe now." Her small body trembled, but she let him pull her close. The doll was still in her hand, its dress torn, stuffing leaking. She clung to him as if letting go would mean vanishing again. Behind them, voices shouted. Laura and the backup team breaking through the woods. Laura's flashlight hit Ethan, then Sophie, and her exhale of relief carried through the night. Johnson, cuffed and dragged into the clearing by officers, screamed curses. But no one listened. He was no longer the predator in control. He was just another man in chains. Laura crouched beside Ethan. "We've got her! She's alive! That's what matters!" But Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, where the hooded figure had disappeared. He replayed the words in his head. Johnson was bait. "We're bigger than you'll ever stop." Later, at the precinct, Sophie was wrapped in a blanket, her parents clutching her like she might dissolve into air. Reporters swarmed outside, but for now, the family was a fortress of love around their daughter. On the evidence table lay what they'd pulled from Johnson's pockets: a burner phone, a small black notebook, and most chilling of all, a two-way radio still crackling with static. A voice had come through once, distorted but clear enough to send a chill down every spine. "Unit lost, extract remaining assets." Laura exchanged a look with Ethan. They didn't say it aloud, but the truth was undeniable. Johnson hadn't been working alone. This was an organized machine, a network hiding in plain sight. Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the press lights flashing against the night. His reflection stared back, haunted but hardened. Tonight, Sophie was safe. But out there, in the dark, the network was still moving, still hunting. Laura joined him, her tone measured. "We got one, but the war's just started." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. His hand unconsciously brushed the badge on his chest, not as a symbol of the system, but as a promise he carved for himself. Behind him, Sophie's laughter rang faintly as her parents kissed her hair, a fragile sound of hope. But in Ethan's mind, the forest still whispered, and the scarred man's voice echoed like a prophecy. "We're bigger than you'll ever stop."